All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the actual Anarchy podcast, the show where we talk about movies from a Rothbardian Anarcho-capitalist perspective. My name is Daniel, and we run actualanarchy.com and readrothbard.com. My co-host Robert is here with me, and today we're going to talk about the movie Passengers, the more recent version, not the one from a few years back. This is the Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence one, right, Robert?
What's up, Freedom Nerds? That's true. We're going to be talking about Passengers. Yeah, recent sci-fi adventure type flick, romance flick. And if you think about it, just calling it a romance movie spoils everything. But we'll get into it.
Well, we are in the business of spoiling things, not only movies with spoilers, but economic fallacies and questions of morality and leftist arguments, ANCOM arguments, and all the like. So that's our bread and butter, buddy.
Yes, we butter our bread with those buttery questions, and we tackle them, and we dig through, and we find little nuggets of love to spread and joy to share with you all.
Yeah, so before we get started, I just want to welcome everyone to visit our site, actualanarchy.com. We've got almost 400 articles up there now, and our show is hosted there. We've got 15 or 16 RSS feeds as well as original content, exclusive writers, and other awesome stuff related to actual anarchy. We also run readrothbard.com, which is books, lectures, and articles by Murray N. Rothbard, the original godfather, granddaddy of the anarcho-capitalist movement. And we've got Amazon links. We've got Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom links. So check those out. Support us in any way you can. Give us a like, comment, share, subscribe. iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, and all the rest, wherever podcasts are sold. Robert, why don't you tell us about this movie, buddy?
What is this movie? You tell me, Daniel. You've seen it. Oh, that's right. You didn't. It's fine. There's really only a few big questions per se. This might be a short episode. It might be a super juicy episode. I don't know. But, okay, it's a 2016, all right, the far past of 2016. And Chris Pratt, also known as Star-Lord, and he also wrangles little dinosaurs when he's not busy traveling through the universe with Jennifer Lawrence. And unfortunately, the mere fact that Jennifer Lawrence shares top billing gives away the plot and the moral question in this movie. But it's called Passengers because they are passengers, do you get it, on a star cruiser, basically. Looks like a big giant whirling tree, like a Christmas tree. And they are traveling to like a near habitable planet. It's the near future. Well, whatever. I don't remember if it actually says or not. It's probably 100 or 200 years in the future. But
and this planet is not actually near, right? It's like pretty far, pretty fucking far.
Well, they're traveling at half light speed, and it's going to take them like 96 years to get there. So in space terms, in space terms, that's really close. But in you and me terms, it's really far. So they are all in this suspended animation, crew, passengers, everybody, and they are going to a colony. And their idea is to, for various reasons, but they're going to a colony. And this ship is super, everybody is really weirded out when things go wrong because this is the best and this never happens and that sort of thing. But what happens is, this happens at the very beginning of the movie.
So is this like the Titanic of galactic spaceships?
Yes.
Complete
Yes, it
with
is.
love story and drowning and naked drawings and all that stuff. Leo DiCaprio, climate change.
Once Chris Pratt starts telling us about climate change while flying around in his private jet every other day, yes, that is exactly what this is.
So it's like a reboot.
Apparently,
Titanic reboot.
yes. This is futuristic Titanic.
Slash
Didn't get
love
the
boat.
love. This movie got fairly panned. I mean, it got a few positive reviews, but it's sitting at like a 40% on Metacritic. It's got fairly decent reviews otherwheres, but I didn't think this movie got the attention it deserved. I watched Suicide Squad, and I mean, I had these two movies, Suicide Squad and Passengers, and I'm sitting there going, which order should I watch these movies in? And I go, well, whichever movie has a better Metacritic rating, I'll save that for last. So I looked at Suicide Squad and had a 40, and then Passengers had a 41.
Oh, good
So
Lord.
I wasn't looking to, I didn't have a whole lot of hope. But I watched Suicide Squad and I'm like, well, this is a dumpster fire of a piece of shit. And I hated it and everything about it. And it was just a big nothing movie.
You know,
Didn't care one whit.
the trailers for that made it look kind of awesome.
The trailer is by far the best thing. That Queen trailer, the Bohemian Rhapsody trailer, fantastic trailer. The movie is a pile of garbage. Yeah, anyway, it's just some generic piece of crap that everyone can and should miss.
So that was our Suicide Squad episode, everyone. Little mini episode, micro episode.
Yeah, don't waste your time watching Suicide Squad. I wasted my time so you don't have to.
What service? What service?
That's right. It's a valuable service I'm providing. But then I watched Passengers, and within 15 minutes, it was 10 times the movie that Suicide Squad was. And I didn't understand the bad ratings. I just kept saying to myself, over and over again that this is so much better of a movie. Even if it ends badly, it's still a way better movie. It held my attention the whole time. There are all these great moral questions. Not all of them, but the ones that they do ask are fantastic. So anyway, Chris Pratt is this mechanic, and he is traveling over to this colony, and he got a discounted ticket because he has a desired profession of being a mechanic on this colony. So the company that transports them, offers discount rates or whatever. And this ship, of course, like the Titanic, it hits something. It hits this giant asteroid. I don't know why it's flying through this asteroid field, but it is. It's all on autopilot, right? Everybody's asleep. And it's flying through space. And it comes into this asteroid field, and it's got this shield on it. It's kind of like an energy shield that deflects or destroys these smaller asteroids. But it hits this one big one, and it can't move out of the way, and it can't deflect it. And it causes some damage to the ship, and it wakes up Chris Pratt. And Chris Pratt's like, okay. And there's all these automatic shits going on to, hey, welcome to whatever, and, you got to go follow through this and do these procedures, and this is your sleeping quarters for the next 90 days before we dock we arrive at the planet.
All right.
And he's going through all these. Okay.
At this point, did he wake up because the system knows that if there's a problem, he's a dude they want to wake up, or is this just some random thing?
From my viewing of the movie, I got that it was a random freak thing. The damage caused of the ship was just happened to damage his sleeping pod and wake him up, and nobody else.
So 1 out of, 5,000?
Right. So he wakes up, and he's going through all these procedures. He's asking the computer, where everybody else is. And the computer can't offer any answers. And so he tries to get to the crew. But the crew is behind this titanium door or something like that. He grabs all these tools. He goes down to the storage bays where all the machinery that they're bringing with them is stored, and he grabs all these tools and blow torches and whatnots, and he's trying to get at the crew because he has questions, right? He's like, well, why am I awake and nobody else is? Because he finds out that he's got 90 more years to go or whatever it is. Like, he'll live his whole life here on this ship, and he doesn't know why. He tries to go back asleep, but it doesn't work that way. Apparently there's a whole procedure that puts you to sleep, but that these pods are only good for keeping you asleep.
Is the procedure involving the Ben Stiller character from Happy Gilmore?
Yes, exactly. It takes a warm cup of hot milk, or a warm cup of shut the hell up, and then you go to sleep. So he can't get at the crew. The only companion he has is this bartender, android, that tends bar at this one place. For some reason, he's the only kind of humanoid android. There are all these other restaurants on the ship, but they're all staffed by these kind of they kind of look like the robot in the Jetsons. The robot, they're kind of I don't know, they're like faceless, mechanical shavers. They don't have no personality. All they do is they serve you. But this android robot bartender is actually kind of human, and he can speak. He has a fairly decent AI, so that Chris Pratt can talk to, and he's not super lonely and stuff.
So you don't mean Rosie the maid, right?
I do mean Rosie the maid, but without the personality of Rosie the maid. She just kind of look like her a little bit.
Okay.
Imagine Rosie the maid and a mechanical shaver, and put those two together, and they look like the robots. It's not a big deal. Anyway, so Chris Pratt is super lonely man, and he starts growing the last man on Earth beard, because what does he care? And he's having breakfast every morning, but he's a C-class passenger, so the automatic breakfast dispenser only gives him regular coffee and some bowl of oatmeal every morning, as opposed to everything else that's available.
It's every day? Same every day?
Every day. Every day. Although he can order other things at other restaurants, so I don't know why he doesn't just go to other restaurants for breakfast. Doesn't make any sense, but they keep using that as a whatever.
And speaking of that beard, I personally have that beard.
You do?
Yeah, it's where I live. Out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm currently rocking a beard. It's a good look. And nobody can see me anyway, so who cares?
Are we those neck-bearded libertarians that everyone complains about?
Yes, we are neckbeards. We are internet neckbeards. Yep.
I believe they're called
trolls. If you didn't know that, you are.
We're trolls.
Sorry. That's what we are. So, Chris Pratt, he's super lonely, and he starts looking over the other passengers, and he finds this good-looking lady. And he's like, ooh, she's looking good. And he finds out who she is, and he finds out that she's a writer, and her writing is available on the ship somehow. I don't know how. But he reads it, and he's totally infatuated with her, thinks she's just be fantastic. She'd be perfect for him, on and on and on. But he's debating with himself and with the bartender guy about, what should he do? He can't go back asleep.
This bartender.
But if he wakes her up, it's absolutely an act of aggression, isn't it?
So I just want to back up for a second. So the bartender dude in the trailer, he reminded me of the bartender in The Shining.
You got me on that one. I haven't seen The Shining in a trillion years.
Oh my goodness, we got to do The Shining.
Really? Because there's moral implications about murdering your family or not?
Well, that's up for debate, my friend.
True story.
All right, continue on. I feel like I just destroyed the entire pivot point of this entire episode right there, because you were about to say what the hinging moment is, and I was like, oh, that dude looks like this other dude.
It's fine. It's fine. The main entire thrust of talking about this movie is just because, is he aggressing against her for waking her up? Because you are essentially dooming her to not, what she wants to do is wake up on this other planet. Now, There is some risk, of course, that you'll never make it. There's risk that you could be woken up accidentally. When he actually wakes her up, he decides to wake her up. He does not tell her that he has woken her up. She's just like, huh, weird that I'm awake. And you're awake, huh, weird. And you were alone for a year, huh, weird. And let's talk and get to know each other. And they're actually, it gets to a point where they're interacting a whole bunch, and he's about to propose to her when the robot, android, bartender, spills the beans. And, you know, she is absolutely horrified and mortified.
That's a violation right there. The bartender is supposed to not divulge anything you tell him at the bar.
In fact, that is part of the discussion. In the movie, he says, I would never tell her because I'm a gentleman. But then Chris Pratt says, well, we have no secrets between ourselves in the company of the bartender. So when Chris Pratt says that, you know, we have no secrets between us, I think the bartender decides that that means that he is free to divulge that information. But afterwards, after she is like super hate mode at this guy, she hates him with all her might. Another guy wakes up, and all kinds of weird shit starts happening in the ship. Systems fail, and like the gravity goes out at some point, and the lights go off, and computers reboot and glitch out. And Morpheus is woken up. Lawrence Fishburne.
What?
And yeah, that's right. He's in this movie. And he's like an old engineer guy. He's one of the crew. And they're like investigating the ship. Like, what's going on with the ship? Why is it breaking? Why is everybody waking up? What's happening? And Lawrence Fishburne goes and investigates the pods, right? And he finds out that, yeah, Chris Pratt, he woke up, you know, as a part of this accident, but Jennifer Lawrence was woken up by Chris Pratt. And the explanation goes as this, like as a reason why, like the movie kind of explains why, or gives some sort of a justification for it here. Jennifer Lawrence goes up to Lawrence Fishburne and is like, you saw what he did. That's murder. So my question for you, Daniel, is it murder? Well, what Lawrence Fishburne says, he says, well, he was alone for a year. He was drowning. And a drowning man will reach for anything to not drown. And he will pull you under with him. Now, she does not take this as, oh yeah, I mean, she's still pissed off, of course. But she doesn't immediately forgive him because of this. But I wondered if you would accept this as an explanation, if you forgive him, or if you see the Chris Pratt character as a completely immoral character for doing this. Now, I also want to know if you think the romance part works, but since you didn't see the movie, I'll have to chime in on that. But I'm going to let you talk for a little bit on anything that I've said and answer the questions that I've asked to you, sir.
All right, so you've asked me a few questions, but I think that the primary one is, was he wrong in waking her, and then is it murder in him doing so? Is that basically...
Yes, that's the basic question.
Okay, and then the bartender confidence issue is ancillary. You know, I think waking her is dishonest, of course, but I mean, there's a reason that solitary confinement is a cruel and unusual punishment. So if he was alone for a year, I mean, that's got to like really mess you up, right? And in our Logan episode, we talked about whether, you know, a mental health issue sort of makes you lose some of your self-ownership. And in that, I would expand upon it and say, does it somehow alter what one would perceive as okay versus not okay? Now, I sort of argue there is an objective morality, but when people are kind of going crazy, they're not going to exactly behave in a moral capacity, right? So it's not that it's okay that he did this, but it's understandable that he did this. And I think that's the Lawrence Fishburne point, right? That he's a drowning man and he's reaching out to whatever he can hold on to. And, you know, it does seem like it was a rather premeditated thing in the respect that he scoured the entire passenger list and then honed in on her and learned as much about her, read her writing, all this stuff. And so, of course, when she awoke, he knew the right buttons to push, the right things to say. It reminds me of, God, what was it? The Bill Murray movie, Groundhog Day, where he keeps going through the same day each time, and he gets to a point where he screws up with the Andie MacDowell girl, and so the next day he changes one slight thing that he did, and he makes it a little bit further in establishing a relationship with her, and then, over time he knows everything that he needs to know to win her over. And I think there's been some other movies that run along a similar kind of idea, right? Like, as much
What Women Want with Mel Gibson, right? He can read her thoughts, so he kind of has an in to what she wants, but he has to still, even though he knows all that stuff, still has to be a decent, honorable person for her to like him. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and in a way, there's some dishonesty there because when you are interacting with them, they don't know that you already know this. And so you're bending your behavior with the foreknowledge or the, and of course this would never happen, but you sort of have the ability to tailor yourself to their needs and wants and desires. And it's not necessarily who you really are. And in fact, you're sort of, in the act of doing this, you're exhibiting that you're kind of a lesser person than you think you are, right? Or that you're portraying. However, I'd argue that, people do this on date number 1 through 10, generally, right? Like, we've talked about this in a previous episode. I don't remember exactly which one, but it was a point
all dating involves fraud. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think it was when we were talking about that dude who was representing himself as like a porn recruiter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and your point was, well, how is it any different than dating, really? I mean, maybe a matter of scale.
Right.
But all he needed to do to solve the problem was actually recruit them for porn. Problem solved. Yeah.
Yeah, for those who haven't listened to that episode, it was a guy who was recruiting girls to be in porn and then sleep with them and record the process. But then he wouldn't forward on the information and the details to any actual porn studios. And that's what got him in trouble, is that he didn't actually follow through on what he said he was going to do. No, all he had to do was just follow through. He would have got him out of all the trouble. But anyway, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, so I think I was sort of working my way towards an answer here, but essentially, I think that Lawrence Fishburne has a point in that you can sort of understand why he did what he did,
mm-hmm.
but in an objective moral sense, it was not the proper thing to do. But I think beyond that, imagine that he is, rather than awakening this girl that he's attracted to, he was able to get to the crew and wake the crew. And let's assume for a moment that the crew, and this probably wouldn't actually be the case, but let's assume that the crew did not previously sign up for, hey, if something happens, wake us up and we'll try to fix the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that they would have, but let's assume they haven't. So in that argument, he is trying to get somebody to help fix the problem. And so I think there's a bit more sympathy, at least for me, for him to wake up somebody who is going to help him solve a problem on the ship, even if they didn't grant their consent ahead of time. So it's sort of like a different reasoning behind it, but it's the same action, like he's still waking somebody up without their consent.
Right, and I give him a much bigger pass for if you had actually woken up one of the crew. It's obviously, I think, a plot device to have the crew locked away under this impenetrable door, whereas the regular crew, or the regular passengers, are just open and available to anybody. Because that's the first thing he tries is to try to wake up, a member of the crew, and I think the audience would have been fully on board with that. That makes total sense because there is a messaging system on the ship, and he goes to that, and he's like, "Hey, I'm awake. Why am I awake? It still says I'm 96 years away from getting to the planet. What's going on?" And the ship says, this will be $6,000. He's like, "Yeah, whatever. Who cares? Okay, your message has been sent. it'll take 23 years to get to Earth, and it'll take 23 years to get back, and you'll get this message in 46 years. And he's like, that's no fucking help at all. So then he goes to, try and open up the crew, and I would have been fully on board with him trying to wake up engineers or whatever, because what ends up happening is when the Lawrence Fishburne character wakes up and they discover what is happening, it turns out that there are also huge side effects, and the plot doesn't explain why it only happens to Lawrence Fishburne. But there were complications to Lawrence Fishburne waking up early. And it said, you now have 196 diseases or complications or problems in your body. And it doesn't explain why only Lawrence Fishburne has those problems. It's more of a plot device to kill off Lawrence Fishburne. Poor Lawrence Fishburne. But they end up finding the problem, which is this, it hit the asteroid at the very beginning, and nobody knew that on board the ship. But it had punctured through the hull and punctured into this engine compartment, and the engine was overheating. And there's a whole kind of dramatic scene where Jennifer Lawrence realizes that Chris Pratt could die fixing this problem, and she realizes that she can't live without him, and she doesn't want to die. She goes up to this hole for an hour where she hates his guts. But then when she realizes that he's going to die and he's sacrificing himself to save her and everybody else on board the ship and that sort of thing, she changes her tune. And if you had seen the movie, I wanted to ask you if that seemed like a realistic turn to you. On the one hand, here's a guy who woke her up and essentially doomed her to a life on board this ship, a life she had no, she knew some risk. She assumed some risk, right? Going on the ship. Something could go wrong. You might get woken up. You don't know. But it's definitely not the life she wanted. But then living alone, she didn't want to go and wake up somebody else. She would rather have him back and live her life with him. So anyway, she saves him, and then they get married on board this ship, and they live out the rest of their life on board the ship. So does that sound like a realistic thing to you? I don't know. I don't really know if I have a whole lot of good questions to ask. It seemed a little bit like plot convenient. Right at this moment, I guess she realized that she really did care for him, and that if they had met, under different circumstances, maybe they would have fallen in love. But I don't know. And another way of thinking about it, what choice did she have? He's the only person, unless she's willing to go wake up somebody else and maybe have them die from having this waking up disease that Lawrence Fishburne had. She's just doomed to live alone. So that's a shit-tastic scenario too. I don't know. Almost seemed kind of like a pragmatic choice on her part to be like, well, I guess I love this guy.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because that would put her in the same shoes as he was in, and if she were to act on that, he would make her the ultimate hypocrite, right? Because she spends an hour hating on him because he did that. And I think that the Lawrence Fishburne discussion about the drowning man maybe put that seed of doubt in her mind that maybe it is understandable why he did what he did. And so then when he comes to this point where, she's kind of got her anger, she's holding on to it, and she thinks it's murder, right? That's what she says, you murdered me.
Right, and that was the question I had for you.
Right, and so before we get to that question, I just want to pursue this line of thinking. Mm-hmm. So she ends up hating him, but then there's a seed of doubt planted in her mind by this Lawrence Fishburne character, who then subsequently dies. So she has this dose of mortality happening, right? And she realizes that she can't be mad at him for something that she would do if she lost him, the Chris Pratt character, and he's out there sacrificing himself for quote unquote the greater good, right, to solve this problem. And she realizes that if he dies, then she will be all alone herself to this isolation and solitary, situation. So I can sort of see, without watching the movie, that somebody could come to resolve during a moment of epiphany to realize that, hey, I would have done the same thing. He's actually out there doing something for me. I don't want to be alone. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that you can justify something in your mind, right? Like most people make an emotional decision and then rationalize it later.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that might be what she's doing here, in deciding that she actually does need him. And it's not even that, they're necessarily this like great match together, even though he may have presented himself in that way. But what other options does she have? There's a huge survival instinct, right? Like if you don't have any other options, then the person across from you is like over time eventually going to, end up looking pretty good because they're your only option.
Right, yeah, and I would say that thousands of years of arranged marriages bear that out.
Right, and it's not to say that that's like a moral thing or the best thing to do, but people will come to adapt. Humans are highly adaptable. There's so many, and this is of course unfortunate, but like in domestic violence, many times the person being abused will stay with the abuser because they're, I don't want to be alone. I need them, or whatever justification they can come up with, even if they're not legitimate or true, even if they could leave, they feel like they can't. And I know I'm butchering this because I'm not in that situation. I really shouldn't be speaking too much on it, but from what I can see, that situation does happen.
Right. And to be fair, the movie does do a pretty good job, I think, after he wakes her up, and even though he's being duplicitous the entire time by having his giant secret, it does do a fairly decent job of, the two actors have fairly decent chemistry. They seem to genuinely like each other. It seems like in the 1 year of isolation, Chris Pratt did his fairly decent homework and figured out that they would be a fairly decent match.
So he eHarmonied her?
Yes, exactly. Although the movie doesn't show us him looking over everybody else. He basically just, I don't think it has time to do that. It basically just land on her, and then he analyzes her and reads her writing and, feels like he knows her mind by the words she's written. So I'll give them, a fairly decent romance point for that. The turn for me was a little quick. She went from absolutely hating this guy and despising him to being there in an emergency. And in an emergency you get your adrenaline up and you're all excited, and you tend to attribute, your exciting times to the people you're with, which is why going on exciting first dates tend to be more successful than just a really boring first date where you're maybe having interesting conversation or whatever. But if you actually get your heart rate up and you're doing something exciting, you falsely put that excitement on the person you're with.
Oh, also a deception then.
Yeah, but hey, that's what dating is, right? First date tip there. Do something exciting.
First date tip from the neckbeards.
Yeah, that's right. So Pratt, for me, when he initially, right before he was thinking about doing it, and you knew he was going to do it, but I kept saying, don't do it. Don't do it. It's terrible. You are aggressing against her absolutely 100%. And, it's not like you couldn't just wake up everybody because, there's thousands of people on the planet. There's probably only enough, resources on the ship to last I think it's 5 months that the crew wakes up before arriving at the planet, and then 3 months for everybody else. So there's probably not enough provisions for everybody to last for 100 years or whatever it was. If waking up one person is immoral, waking up everybody, even worse, if you want to go down that road. Other than that, she forgives him. and then they live happily ever after, sort of, supposedly. But I don't know. That's pretty much my entire load on Passengers. It's unfortunate you haven't seen it, but maybe more things.
Let's explore it a little bit, because she claims that he murdered her, but she's there in front of him talking to him. So that's a little weird.
Yeah, that is a little weird.
He does remove the life she thought she was going to have. That much is true. But she still has her life. And yes, he did aggress in waking her up, because she, of course, did not agree to this ahead of time, and she's not crew, so it's like less understandable. But he was, as Morpheus was saying, the drowning man who was going to go crazy, right? And what's his other alternative? Kill himself? Or go crazy and wake people up?
Yeah, and there is a point in time in the movie in the beginning where he's standing at the airlock and he's about to push the button. So yeah, he contemplated it at least once, if not multiple times. But he actually tried to, maybe go through it once.
Yeah, so is it murder to remove what somebody thought their life was going to be? Nobody knows what the future's going to hold. I mean, she's going on this spaceship to go to sleep for 120 years or whatever the number is, to go to some other planet. There's certainly a risk involved with that, and I'm sure there'd be some contracts and documents that she would have signed stating as such. Not to say that that meant she agreed to be awakened. Chris Pratt, he also didn't agree to be awakened, and for whatever reason, his one pod out of thousands gets woken up because of the asteroids. I don't know. Based on what you've told me in the movie, it almost plays out as kind of the best way it could have. I mean, not that, he didn't violate the NAP. I think he did. But his alternative was kill himself or go insane and probably kill himself or harm even more people.
Well, to point that out, I mean, to make on that point, the ship is degrading, and it's the Chris Pratt character along with the Jennifer Lawrence character who ended up saving the ship.
Oh, right. Yeah. So they would have all died.
If he hadn't woken her up, yeah, the whole ship would have blown up, and everybody would have died. Not to necessarily say that justifies what he did, but he did, in the end, rescue everybody from certain death. So,
right. Now, imagine he never woke up. The movie doesn't happen, right? Like, ship gets hit by asteroids, degrades over time, everyone dies.
Yeah, that's not a movie anybody would make.
So you got to have a story. So yeah, based on what you told me, I think that, it played out sort of the best case scenario where he was, able to come to the aid of the 5,000 people who were remaining. I don't know, it's kind of bizarre. It's another one of those, like Mad Max, like those contrived situations, of course.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting exploration of the morality. I think that there's degrees or a scale of violations, like, a small thing to a big thing. And this wasn't necessarily a small thing, but it wasn't outright murdering her. I mean, she was still alive. Did he take something from her? Well, yeah, he took her expectations of what she was going to get, but she also would have known the risks, I think, or would have had at least signed some, stack of papers that said, hey, there's, risk of this and this and this and 5,000 other things. So it's not like it wasn't outside of the realm of possibility, even if you didn't read it. I mean, you got to know, like, you're taking a risk whenever you do anything. And going into a starship to go to sleep for 120 years, I think would be pretty high on that risk scale. Yeah, and even though they do, throughout the movie, they keep remarking on, well, that's impossible. You can't possibly be awake because the pods never fail. They don't fail. They just don't fail. Which Titanic pods.
Right. It's a Titanic situation where, yeah, this boat can't sink. But it just shows that, yeah, even though you think that something is guaranteed, there is no such thing as a guarantee. And how much did he actually, he robbed her of her supposed life, because her plan, I don't think I've mentioned this yet, was to go to this faraway planet, and it was going to take her, 100 and whatever years, live there for 1 year, write about it, and then return to Earth, 240 years later or whatever it is, where everybody, back on Earth would be dead, but she would be the only person with that story because she's like a journalist and she wanted to write about how she did this amazing thing or whatever. So that was her plan that he robbed her of. At the very end of the movie, she's, totally happy, and she has lived a full life with this man that she loves on board this ship. When the crew wake up to find, we assume that we find the two of them dead. I was expecting, from my point of view, when the crew wakes up, they find some young people living there and just hanging out, living life, doing whatever.
Oh, like kids?
Yeah, kids, man. What do they do? They're two young people. They could have kids. You're going to want to have kids. You don't want to just be the two of you on board that spaceship forever. Maybe you do. Maybe. I thought kids were coming, but they didn't. But yeah, you've already mentioned it a bit, but I think you have certain expectations about your future, and you definitely have the right not to be aggressed against. But just because what you think is going to be your life is going to be like, and it doesn't turn out that way, doesn't mean that you have somehow necessarily lost something, I don't think. You definitely have all this possibility, but just because your life takes one path over another doesn't necessarily mean you've lived a less of a life, so to speak, even if you don't get to do all the things you initially wanted to.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily ascribe to the butterfly effect. I'm sure there's some quantum physics or some kind of philosophy around it, but any slight change or deviation in a plan can totally alter the outcome. And how many people actually live the life that they plan or foresee?
Almost nobody. Yeah, everybody. You always ask, what did you want to be when you grew up? And it's always some other thing that they say.
Right, like John Lennon said, life's what happens when you're busy making other plans.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people have goals and don't follow through on them. I mean, I'm sure that there's a small minority of people who are super goal focused and oriented and figure out how to accomplish that whole list of things that they do or want to do. But even they don't have the luxury of foretelling the future and seeing that it's all going to work out. The whole idea of voluntary choice and free interactions means that you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. So I think at the end of the day, it's not murder. It certainly is some level of an aggression. But he didn't take anything from her.
Mm-hmm.
He introduced a risk, or realized a risk that she was aware of, I think, or would have at least on paper signed up for.
Do you see yourself, you're in love with this Chris Pratt character and he's romancing you and he's whatever, then you find out that he's woken you up.
I'm all hot and bothered now, by the way.
I know. I'm pushing your button. And you find out that he has betrayed you and woken you up. But then he sacrifices himself to save you and everybody else. Are you going to forgive him for this transgression? Because this is a huge thing, right? This is a huge thing to have this life ripped away from you of what you think is going to happen as opposed to what actually happens. And it's all because of this one person who is drowning, grabbing you.
Right, but to go back to our, butterfly effect thing, you never know what is really going to happen, how many people get the life that they actually envision. And are
you going to be able to rationally think about that when you're upset with Chris Pratt?
Well, not initially, of course, but there's a huge time scale here, right? He was on this thing for a year awake, and then they romance for a while, of course, right? And then she discovers this due to the bartender, which I think we can touch on just real briefly before we shut this one down. But she's had time to go through the Kubler-Ross, stages of grief. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
The acceptance at the end, which, maybe the catalyzing event was the adrenaline, like, oh, he's sacrificing himself, he's going to die, then I'll be alone, and then I'll be in what position, I go crazy or I wake someone else up, and then I can't be mad at him for doing the thing that I did or would do. Mm-hmm. So I can see that with enough time scale, you get through that stages, and you have this emotionally charged event, and it kicks over. It sounds reasonable to me, especially from a storytelling perspective.
There's also a large pragmatic point, right? I mean, you got to forgive him at some point because you're the only two people on board the ship, and you don't want to live alone for the rest of your life, do you?
Right, alone but together. I mean, I guess a lot of people do that. But yeah, I mean,
I just described like every wedding marriage ever. I don't know. Sorry.
But yeah, I mean, over a long enough time scale, I think that human nature is to process emotions and then make the best of their situation. Like, that's the whole idea of economizing, right? You take limited resources, scarce resources, and limited time, scarce time, and you try to achieve your ends with the means you have available. And I think that they were means to each other, right? Like, they looked at their environment and made determinations on what's going to make them happy. And of course, they had to get through the emotional anger, because I'm sure that, yeah, I'd be pissed off too. But at some point, yeah, you do have to get pragmatic and decide, okay, the past is the past. I'm pissed off about it, but I've got to make a decision. What's the rest of my life going to be like? What do I want to just continue to be pissed off, or do I want to make the best of the situation? And anyone can play with that.
Do you ever truly forgive the man, or do you just kind of like put it in the past, move forward?
Subjective, man. I don't know. I can't speak for her or him.
I'm asking you, because Chris Pratt has woken you up, robbed you of your life. Do you ever forgive the man? Truly forgive him?
He's robbed me of the life I was thinking I was going to get. He wasn't robbing me of my life. I'm sitting there talking to him.
Yeah.
Personally, yeah, I think that, I get used to it. I'd be like, all right, this is my situation now. I can't go back. Being pissed off at you is not going to accomplish anything. So, yeah, pragmatic. Make the best of it. I mean, unless he's like totally a shitty person and you don't want to like be around them.
Which, yeah, the movie never gives us. It only gives us they like each other a whole lot, and then she learns the truth and she hates him. So she knows that she can like him, and she does like him. She just feels betrayed, which is understandable.
Yeah, totally understandable. But I don't think it's murder, and I don't think that you can rob somebody of, like, it's not a tangible property, like what you think your future is going to be. It's sort of like a patent,
Yeah.
It's not real property, like it's not something someone can actually own. It's a goal they can have in their mind that they attempt to achieve, but everyone knows that not everything's going to go according to plan, and that's just how things work.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the same, but say if your goal or whatever, you have this idea that you're going to invent like the light bulb, and then this asshole Thomas Edison comes along and beats you to it. Has he robbed you of your life? I don't think so, but that's not the same.
Right, and only with the government patent office has he robbed you of anything. I mean, I think that IP is theft, intellectual property is theft. To do a take on the property is theft. I think intellectual property is theft because you're preventing someone else from utilizing or using their own creation because you won this mythical race to a patent office.
Right. Which is enforced with government violence.
Right, exactly. Do you want to shift to the bartender dude?
If you got anything on the bartender dude, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I thought he was Simon Pegg for the entire movie, by the way. If anybody has seen this movie, it's not Simon Pegg, but it looks a lot like him. And probably doesn't look super like him, but it was enough that I go, oh, Simon Pegg, for some reason.
Well, he's on a starship, right? And now he's been playing, what is it, Scotty on the newer Star Trek movies?
Yeah, and he had a cameo in the new Star Wars movie, The Force Awakens. So, yeah, he's all into this bizzo.
And you're a total nerd, so it works out.
Shut your face.
I thought you wanted to keep going. So, the bartender dude. So I was sort of earlier in this episode, speaking not of the movie, but just the whole general implicit agreement that exists, I believe, between bartenders and their patrons. Like, you go to the bar and you tell them about your problems, and it's in confidence.
Okay, like a doctor-client privilege.
Yeah, but not, you're not signing anything. It's just sort of how things are. And I don't know if it's like a legitimate thing or not, but it's an impression that I get is that there's this implicit agreement that, you can sort of like bend their ear and they won't divulge that information outside of that situation.
Well, now,
right or wrong.
Let's pretend that the bartender is a real person. And he knows that Chris Pratt wakes her up. Do you think he has any kind of obligation? And I know we're not for positive obligations here, but just play around with this one. Does he have any sort of obligation to tell her that this Chris Pratt guy is being duplicitous?
Yeah, that's a tough call. Like, let's say, you have a friend, that they're cheating on their girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, husband, whatever. Do you have an obligation, quote unquote obligation? Do you tell your friend that, hey, so-and-so's doing X? I don't know. Yeah. I think that's a tough call. That's an individual making that call. I don't think that there's really a good choice in that, because you're betraying one in either situation.
Yeah, it gets into loyalty and whatnot. Because the person who is being duplicitous has already betrayed the person.
Right. So the moral high ground is you tell on them, but then you're a narc.
Yeah. Right.
And then what's your relationship with both parties? Like, let's say it's, your best friend is doing the duplicitous shit. Then it really plays into the loyalty thing. It's a tough question.
Yeah, it is tough. And I don't know if I have the answers.
But in this movie, the bartender is, of course, computer, a robot. So does that change your impression of the situation? Because you had said that he makes an agreement with Chris Pratt that everything is in confidence, right? And then in front of, what's her name? Jennifer something?
Jennifer
Lawrence. He says, oh, there's no secrets between us, in earshot of this guy, the bartender guy thing. Bartender. Right. And so the bartender's there, he hears that and he goes, oh, that's a lie. Mm-hmm. Or that's permission for me to divulge anything. Right.
And in his defense, the bartender really kind of breaks it to her really well. The bartender goes, man, that was such a hard decision for him to wake you up. It was, he fought himself for a year. He didn't want to do it. He really lays the case out for Chris Pratt, but, it's not good enough, which it wouldn't be for me either. I'd be like, what the fuck you just say?
Yeah, so let's get into that, because you asked me, well, I don't mean to derail you, but when you're done with your point, you had asked me, what would I think if Chris Pratt woke me up, the hunka burning love he is. Let's switch it back to you, because you just said you would not be okay with this. So explain that, but make your point, unless you're ready to just shift over to that other thing that I just said.
Like, would I be? I don't know if I would have been as forgiving as the Jennifer Lawrence character. I'm not a woman, but if you just reverse the roles, I might have been, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
So if a woman woke you up, you'd be maybe okay with it, but if you were a woman and some dude woke you up, you wouldn't be? Sexist?
Yeah, I'm very sexist. Well, no, I think I would have, the pragmatism of the event would have taken over, and I probably would have been resentful about it. Maybe my entire life, I don't know. Depends on how you're feeling with the lady friend. They definitely seem to truly care for each other, and I could empathize with their decision and not wanting to be alone and whatever. But I still would have felt, aggressed upon and somewhat robbed, even though, like we've said, it's not necessarily murder, but you are taking away the expectations, even though we're not guaranteed anything in life, like we kept saying. Would I forgiven Jennifer Lawrence for waking me up? Yeah, man, it wouldn't have been the super quick turn, but of course it's a movie and they're compressing things for time. So the characters need to make quick turns.
What's it take you, 5 years, 10 years? I mean, you're aging this whole time, right?
Right. But, we're living on this ship together. There's no one else to talk to except for this robot. Would I wake somebody else up? Probably not. That would just, make me a hypocrite. So, man, it's a tough one.
Now, what if we dive into a sub-question of, so you're both awake now, and you determine we've got X number of supplies, and we could wake up a dozen more people and still make it on time to this thing, or, still have enough for everyone to make it to their end result, other than the people we wake up, just so you have like a community of sorts? Or do you maybe wake up some of the crew who would have probably, unlike my scenario in the beginning, where they would not have consented to this kind of thing happening? Well, I guess once you fix the malfunction, then that consent wouldn't have still been in play. But like, just to have a sense of community, would you wake up additional people once you've come to terms with the first person waking you up? Sounds like for you, probably not.
For me, it would be more like, hey, let's have some kids. But if, we were both males or both females, that might be more of a pressing question. Because you have kids to not only pass on your DNA and whatever, but you also make this rich family life, right? Where you have all these varying personalities and you're developing and teaching and getting all these rich experiences. I mean, you're a dad. There's probably reasons why you had children, aren't there? Probably.
I'll try to remember some of them. No, my girls are great. They're awesome. And I get to spend a lot of time with them, which I feel very fortunate about that. They're awesome.
Full disclaimer. He likes his kids. Good. Yeah, so if you didn't have that option of being able to have children, or let's say that they are like sterile or something, or having been woken up early, it's messed up your reproductive whatever.
Oh, maybe they've got the app you were telling me about pre-show, where they can find out if Chris Pratt's got swimmers or not?
Yeah, maybe they got that app, Daniel. It's in the future. And the app's coming out next year, or maybe if the FDA approves of it. Who knows if they will. And it's going to cost like $50. So it's going to be sweet. Cut the cost down from like $250 to $350, what it is now, to get your sperm tested. But, yeah, say they aren't fertile, then it's just the two of them. I still probably wouldn't. I don't think I would. I can't speak for how crazy I'll get. But in this frame of mind, right here speculating on what I might do, I would say I wouldn't. But I also believe in the NAP, so people in desperate situations will do desperate things. And like we've said on the show multiple times, it's hard to necessarily Monday morning quarterback them, especially when they're the ones that have been aggressed against, but also just in like crazy situations that happen in movies that generally almost never happen in real life, but other times they do. And that's where we make our hay on this show.
Yeah. So just some of the economics, real briefly. You had mentioned a couple of things like he's a C-class passenger. He got a discounted rate to get on this thing. He can only get a certain type of meal. It costs X amount to send a message, and whether he has that amount of money or credits or whatever. Does it feel like maybe there's a little bit of a Snowpiercer, like classism commentary here?
I didn't get that vibe. I mean, when Jennifer Lawrence gets woken up, she is like an A-class passenger. So they're sitting down to breakfast, like in one of their first scenes as they're both awake, and he's eating his like oatmeal. And she sits down with, her eggs and toast and everything else. And she's like, what have you been eating for this whole year? And so he's like, yeah, no, it's fine. fine. I'm not an A-class passenger. And she's like, oh, forget about it. She goes and gets him one. But I think it was more of just, it costs a lot of money. They do make some comments at the beginning about him being design profession, so he got his rate cut. And then they also made some comments about how lucrative the company was, how they were like almost the exclusive farrier to these new worlds. So imagine like SpaceX or whatever in a couple hundred years in the future or something, and they have they're the exclusive, or not necessarily the exclusive, but like the main provider, the Amazon of shuttling people to and from planets, and how lucrative that would be. It's interesting. I saw an article the other day that was talking about how I think it was SpaceX, how they're not governed by U.S. regulations, and how that they would have to regulate themselves. And I was like, sweet, sounds like a good idea, because the United States doesn't have jurisdiction in space. Imagine that. And so the market will have to decide what the proper procedures would be for traveling in space for passengers, as opposed to bureaucrats. Imagine that.
Yeah, I love the blind belief in experts and good politicians to steer the good ship government to make the best decisions for everyone else. Mm-hmm. And it, on its surface, it's a plausible argument, right? Like, you've got experts in this particular subject matter making decisions, but it totally misses the point of the distributed information network that the market is. The prices convey information about the relative abundance or scarcity of millions and millions of items, components, commodities, what have you. And it transmits this information in a very organic latticework kind of structure that has more information than any expert or even a supercomputer could manage, to make decisions with, right? Mm-hmm. And all of these things, so long as they're voluntary, are perfectly moral things to do, and any intervention within that is, of course, a violation. And so it's just kind of an interesting problem to discuss with someone who isn't familiar with how theories of economics or how markets function, to think that, we just rely on electing the right people or getting the right experts, the technocrats in place. It's a very progressive leftist ideal, and I think a lot of Republicans even kind of fall into that. Statists kind of fall into this trap. And like I said, it seems plausible on the surface.
Right. Yeah, I was just listening to a part of the problem episode where Gene Epstein had a debate on whether or not healthcare should be privatized. And apparently some Huffington Post, I haven't listened to the debate at all, but apparently some Huffington Post guy came on and argued that government should be involved and that sort of thing. And apparently he won the debate. He convinced more of the undecideds than the free market guy.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. But, when you say that, more people will be covered if we subsidize it than if you don't, it's a difficult position if you accept that and don't counter it with, at what cost? Are you morally?
What does coverage mean at that point?
Right.
Is coverage the goal, or is health the goal? Is affordable services? Is voluntary choices? Uh-huh. Like everyone in communist country had healthcare insurance, right? Everyone in Cuba's got health insurance. Everyone's covered, 100%.
Paradise, Daniel.
Oh yeah, good stuff. It's part of why you can lie with statistics and feel-good arguments and emotional arguments. And it's unfortunate, and it's really hard to get through to folks on that, to crack that bubble. Yeah, it is, because government is seen as, we have it, so therefore we should use it. When every problem looks like a nail, get your machine gun. That's right.
and you keep using this government, you keep advocating for it, even though just because, we have it. Well, we have it, so we should use it. If that's your argument every time, then what's the point in having a principle if you abandon it when it's inconvenient?
Indeed, sir.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't have anything else, I feel like we should wind this one down. I think it was actually pretty good to get an hour or so out of a movie that has basically one or two crucial questions. So good job on us.
We milked it. We milked the shit out of this one. It's a really good movie. I recommend it. We just spoiled the shit out of it. Hopefully you saw it before you heard this. It did come out 5-6 months ago. It's well done, well acted, well written, but I don't know if it's necessarily perfect, but it's way better than Suicide Squad. So if you saw that shit show, watch this thing instead, or watch this thing too.
We run ActualAnarchy.com and ReadRothbard.com. I welcome you to visit the site, check out the 300 to 400 plus stories that are there. We post a few every day. We've got an RSS feed. We've got Amazon links. We've got Amazon Prime down at the bottom. Check out Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom. We appreciate you joining us for this episode where we talked about the movie Passengers. Find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, or wherever podcasts are sold. Thank you very much. We'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, homies.
Peace out.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.